There is a difference between listening to somebody talk and interacting with living history. Good morning, Colorado. Good morning, the world. This is Kim Greenhouse. I'm delighted you're listening today because today is, in fact, a segment on exploration and discovery. In 1967, an international space treaty was formed, which was an international effort that laid down the clear context and highest intent regarding what exploration in outer space was to be about. The world is fascinated with outer space, and particularly the United States of America. You know, the imagination is exciting, and the prospect of the future beyond this planet has always been compelling. However, there is danger lurking when the polarization and misuse of power on Earth begins to have its way in outer space. Years ago, I was deeply shocked and saddened when I personally experienced that our planet was on the market. But I was horrified when I read in the Christian Science Monitor that perhaps outer space may be on the market, that people and organizations have been paying money for lunar deeds, that monies are being transacted in this area, and that ownership laws on Earth are being projected into space. But wait, we have good news, because we have the living history of the origin of this international space treaty. The woman you're about to meet was part of the drafting of the NASA Law of International Cooperation. She was the honorary director of the International Institute of Space Law. She's a trustee and emeritus of the International Academy of Astronautics. She is considered the grand matriarch of space law. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eilene Galloway to It's Rainmaking Time. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm glad you're here.
Yes, I'm here.
You represent at least 98 years of living history.
Yes.
And I know us women are very sensitive about our age being told, but the truth is that you were around at the formation of all of this. And this is very important that you're able to talk about your take and your experience of what happened and what is happening and where are we today. And with that, I'd like to ask you, what was the reaction when the Russians were first to launch a satellite in outer space in 1967? What happened?
Well, it was very exciting. It was on a Friday afternoon that we learned that the Soviet Union was first to launch a satellite. We had not known that they were so advanced in rocketry. And it was a great shock as this satellite went around in 90 minutes all over the earth and affected all nations. And it was like a psychological bomb on Capitol Hill. And it was viewed as a problem in national defense. And it was therefore considered to be a military problem.
And how did you become involved in all this? And what's your background working on the problem that arose?
Well, it was necessary for us to become prepared to know to what extent we were prepared. And I had written a booklet on guided missiles in foreign countries that was published by the House and Senate. And I had worked on the Atomic Energy Act and for the Atomic Energy Commission. And therefore, I was called upon to work on space. And on Monday morning, Lyndon Johnson called and asked if I could help with the hearings. So the hearings began on the Preparedness Investigating Subcommittee, and they went on for many weeks. And these hearings were only 3 weeks after the Sputnik went up.
And what were they about? What are these hearings? What was covered in these hearings?
Well, when we first started out, we considered that this was a problem of national defense. But when we called up the scientists and engineers to testify, we discovered that if we could use the information we got from outer space, that there were many wonderful but beneficial uses. And therefore, our concept of the problem changed from one of fear of orbiting weapons of mass destruction to one of hope for peace. And the problem was how to organize in order to maintain peace, safety, and order in outer space.
And is this why space law began in the United States of America, and how did it actually form?
Well, the first thing that the Congress had to do was to decide on how to organize this. They had to decide how to organize the Department of Defense, because they were the only ones that had any space activities going on, and how to organize a new civilian space program. And it was President Eisenhower who made the decision to have a civilian program. And then we had to learn how to coordinate and have central guidance for the different subjects that were covered by outer space, and how to harmonize U.S. national and international.
Did Congress meet this challenge?
Yes, they did. We had hearings both in the House and in the Senate, and we finally came up with a NASA Act, and we had a program that was divided into two parts. One was exploration, and the other was uses. And the uses were about everything: the weather, navigation, agriculture, what we could get from remote sensing.
What is remote sensing? Because a lot of us don't know.
Well, they take pictures of the Earth, and they can tell where crops are diseased and do something about it very early on. They can tell how long it takes ice to melt and whether there's going to be a flood and where it will be. And there are many, many uses.
Is that the same thing as GPS or the satellite photography?
Yes.
Okay, so remote sensing is satellite
Yes, that's
photography.
right.
Okay.
That's taking pictures of the Earth.
Because many of us don't know what remote sensing is.
And, of course, it covers navigation.
What was the role that the U.S. played in the UN developing outer space law?
Well, there were three forces that converged so that we could go from thinking we were solving a problem that was solely military to a problem where we were including science and technology and the benefits from outer space. Those forces were the nation states of the whole world, International Geophysical Year that the scientists and engineers were carrying on, and the United Nations that could serve as a forum where all these things could be discussed and where we could formulate space treaties.
And when the space treaty was first formed, what were the problems in the original formation of it? I mean, with the formation of anything, there are challenges. But what were the original concerns and main problems in early formation?
Well, we had to set up a special unit in the United Nations to deal with that. And it was very exciting. President Eisenhower who was the Republican president, asked the Democratic leader of the Senate, Lyndon Johnson, to go to the United Nations and set up the ad hoc committee on the peaceful uses of outer space. And that was very exciting. Eisenhower sent a plane down to Texas. I happened to be in Texas at the time and was on the plane with Lyndon Johnson and Lady Bird, and we landed at LaGuardia and were met by Henry Cabot Lodge, and we proceeded to gather up all the other countries that we could in order to set up the organization that would work on formulating the space treaties.
What were some of the problems that you faced then that were emerging?
Well, the first problem was that the Russians and the Czechs and the Poles did not become a member of the ad hoc committee because there were a lot of people on it and they were making the decisions by majority vote. And since the Russians and the U.S. were the only ones that had any kind of space, they didn't want all these other countries making the decisions. So that problem was solved by deciding that all decisions would be made by consensus, that everybody on the committee would have to agree before they can come to a conclusion. And that was indeed how the treaties were formed. There are 5 space treaties. 4 of them have been accepted by most nations. The main treaty is the 1967 treaty, and it has been ratified by 98 nations